The south bank of the Mara River woke up in silence that September morning. Wrong silence. The birds that normally explode into noise with the first light were quiet. The herons were gone, even the crocodiles. The ones that live almost motionless on the mud banks had pulled back into deep water. The rangers of the Masai Mara National Reserve picked up on the anomaly before they even saw the body. When they reached the isolated bend where the river curls north, the scene stopped both men in their tracks. Lying in the mud and reeds of the bank was the carcass of an adult male hippo, over 2,200 pounds. Decades of life and battle scars etched into every inch of his armored hide. But it wasn't the size of the body that froze the rangers. It was what had been done to it. The animal's head hung at an angle that made no sense. Not cut, not sawn. Torn away with a mechanical brutality so total, so efficient in its violence, that the single strip of muscle still connecting head to body looked almost absurd. Like nature had left one loose bolt on a structure that had otherwise been dismantled by industrial machinery. And this was the third carcass in 60 days. 38 days earlier, 2 miles upstream, another adult hippo had been found in the exact same condition. 50 days before that, the first one. All males, all adults, all with the same impossible wound, the head destroyed by repeated blows of pure, blunt force. So who, or what, was doing this to 2-ton hippos in the Mara River? Welcome to Wild Nario. Today you're going to find out that the deadliest serial killer in the African ecosystem doesn't have claws, doesn't roar, isn't a carnivore, and doesn't have a single spot on its coat. If you want to find out who's really behind these killings, smash that like button, subscribe, and let's get into it. The Mara River isn't just a river. It's a vital artery, a highway of water that cuts across the border between Kenya and Tanzania and sustains one of the most violent ecosystems on the planet. This is where the Great Migration happens, the movement of more than 1.5 million wildebeest and zebra crossing the water in search of fresh grazing, turning the river into an annual explosion of chaos and blood. This is where 4-meter Nile crocodiles lie positioned like torpedoes, waiting for the exact right moment to strike. The Mara River is an arena, and in that arena, there's only one law that actually holds, the law of brute force. During the dry season, that arena shrinks, and the danger grows with it. Water levels drop. What used to be a wide, connected corridor fractures into isolated pools, pockets of hot mud and rot, where animals that would normally keep a safe distance from each other get crammed into spaces too small for predator and prey to share. The tension hanging over those shrinking pools isn't a metaphor. It's physical, you can feel it. The reserve's guides have learned to read it just by looking. When the river gets too small, something always breaks. The hippopotamus is the third largest land mammal on Earth, behind only elephants and rhinos. An adult male weighs between 3,300 and 6,600 pounds. His skin is nearly 2 inches thick in the most protected zones. And here's the number that surprises almost everyone. Statistically, hippos kill more humans every year than any other large African mammal. More than lions, more than elephants, and they do it with zero feeding motivation whatsoever. This is a strict herbivore. It doesn't eat meat, it kills for territory. Any unauthorized presence in its stretch of river or on its bank is treated as a declaration of war. And declarations of war get exactly one immediate response. This animal's bite is among the 5 most powerful on the planet. Strong enough, combined with its body weight, to cave in boat hulls and tear apart anything it decides is an enemy. Now hold that thought and think about what happens when you compress hundreds of these animals into a shrinking pool, week after week, as the dry season tightens its grip. Hippos live in large pods, in loosely organized bachelor and family groups. But rivals inside those groups are always testing each other, always circling, always measuring. Let's go back to what the rangers actually found, because the real mystery here isn't just the horror of the wound, it's that the wound breaks every rule of known hippo biology. Hippos, generally, don't die in territorial fights. And the mechanics of how those fights actually play out are extremely well documented. 2 males square off, jaws wide open, pushing against each other, jockeying for position, trying to drive their tusks into the flanks and sides of the opponent. The resulting wounds are puncture wounds scattered across the body. The loser backs down, and rarely dies on the spot. If death does follow, it's usually days later, from infection in those puncture wounds. Hippos don't need to finish a rival off. Their combat is a war of attrition. Slow, exhausting, built around posturing and endurance, not annihilation. What the rangers found on the riverbank was nothing like that. This was not combat. This was planned destruction. To cause that level of damage to an animal weighing over a ton with 2 inches of hide armoring the neck and cervical vertebrae like solid concrete blocks. You would need something that, according to the investigators' original assumptions about African wildlife, simply didn't exist in that ecosystem. Suspect 1, a pride of lions. A large, coordinated pride can occasionally bring down an adult hippo in extreme drought conditions when food is scarce, but the body showed none of the signatures of a feline attack. No multiple claw marks, no bite clusters, no evidence of a prolonged struggle, and critically, lions don't decapitate. The mechanics of a big cat's jaw, however powerful, simply cannot produce this result on an adult hippo. Ruled out. Suspect 2, the Nile crocodile. This was the most intuitive suspect. An adult Nile croc reaches over 16 feet and weighs more than 2,000 pounds. Its bite is even more powerful than a hippo's, second only to the saltwater crocodile. Its hunting technique, the infamous death roll, has been documented taking down massive prey, including full-grown wildebeest. But a crocodile kill ends in drowning and rotational dismemberment. It grabs, drags into the water, and spins. The resulting wounds are deep gouges and limbs torn off through twisting force, not the kind of trauma produced by this reptile's cone-shaped teeth. And on top of that, nothing on the carcass had been eaten. No predator had fed on the body. Crocodile, ruled out. Suspect 3, humans. Given the sheer scale of the trauma, some investigators floated the idea of machinery, a chainsaw, an industrial cutting tool, or even a boat propeller, which does occasionally injure hippos that charge motorized boats. But this theory collapsed under 3 objections nobody could answer. First, no machinery noise was reported on any of the days the carcasses were found. Second, the hippos were killed in isolated stretches of river with no human traffic. No safari routes, nowhere heavy equipment could reach without leaving obvious tracks. Third, and most damning of all, the tusks were untouched. An adult hippo carries ivory tusks worth a fortune on the black market. Any poacher capable of getting close enough to sever a hippo's neck would absolutely have taken the tusks. All 3 bodies were recovered with tusks fully intact. The killer wasn't human. Suspect 4, an elephant in must. A severe hormonal state that turns even a normally calm bull elephant extremely aggressive and unpredictable. But there wasn't a single elephant track anywhere near the kill sites. And that's the point where investigators arrived at a hypothesis that sounded absurd at first. But the more they examined it, the more it became the only explanation left standing. The killer was almost certainly another hippo, but not just any hippo. Camera trap footage, cross-referenced with guide testimony, kept pointing back to one individual, a colossal male, noticeably larger than the already massive average for hippos in this region. Guides had been tracking sightings of this animal for months, and his behavior had been escalating in ways that crossed clean out of what the scientific literature classifies as normal territorial behavior. He was chasing rival males across unusual distances, blocking entire groups from reaching water, attacking without the ritual display behavior that normally precedes a territorial confrontation or a mating dispute. The yawning, the dung-flinging, the posturing that's supposed to end things before they turn lethal. What the drought and the shrinking territory had done to this animal wasn't just amplify his natural aggression, it had recalibrated something deeper. It had pushed him into a behavioral pattern that doesn't technically exist in the vocabulary of wildlife biology, but that any homicide investigator would recognize instantly. A serial pattern, a compulsion toward elimination that went far beyond simple territorial defense. A declaration of absolute sovereignty, written in blood. So here's the question that's been hanging over this whole investigation. How? How could a hippo, even the largest, most aggressive individual ever recorded in this reserve, physically produce a wound like that? The answer lies in one of the most misunderstood weapons in the entire animal kingdom. Most people picture hippo teeth as big, rounded, blunt, appropriate for a plant eater. That mental image is completely wrong. The lower canines of an adult hippo aren't teeth in any normal sense. They're swords. They can grow up to 20 inches long, made of dense ivory, one of the toughest biological materials that exists in nature. And here's the detail almost nobody knows. They're permanently sharp. Every single time a hippo closes its mouth, the lower canines grind against the upper ones. That friction doesn't wear the tusks down, it sharpens them. It's a continuous, built-in sharpening process, hardwired into the animal's own physiology. This animal is walking around with 2 20-inch, self-sharpening ivory blades in its mouth at all times. But the weapon alone doesn't explain the result. The mechanics of the strike do. A hippo's jaw opens to an angle of up to 150 degrees, When that structure slams shut, the muscular force involved exceeds 1,800 psi. For context, an adult lion's bite generates somewhere between 500 and 700 psi. A hippo's bite alone is already 2 to 3 times stronger. Now add the mass. A 2-ton animal brings full-body impact force into the equation. This isn't a crushing bite delivered slowly. This is a high-velocity double puncture, followed by the collapse of 2 tons of body weight into a lateral upward strike aimed directly at the base of another hippo's neck. The cervical vertebrae, massive as they are, aren't wrapped in the same thick muscle layer that protects the torso. Right at the junction between head and neck, you've got a dense concentration of major blood vessels, nerves, and a vertebral joint that, under enough lateral pressure, simply gives way. Skin and bone, both. 2 tons of muscle and pure territorial instinct, concentrated into a single motion. That's what it takes to do this, and that's exactly what this animal has. The picture investigators eventually pieced together. The alpha opened his jaw completely, a full 150-degree gape, a visual signal that every animal in this ecosystem instinctively reads as imminent death. He maneuvered his rival into position, and he struck. He probably repeated it 2 or 3 times before his opponent stopped moving. The first strike likely caused unconsciousness and torn ligaments. The second and third finished the job. The rival was dead before he had any chance to understand what was happening to him. If you made it this far, drop that like right now, because this next part is where it gets even more disturbing. 3 mass killings in 60 days, all adult males, all destroyed with the exact same violent repeated strikes. In territorial species, when a dominant individual eliminates a rival, the behavior is supposed to stop once the territory is secured. Stress levels drop, aggression retreats. That's how it's supposed to work. That's not what happened here. The working hypothesis among the reserve's biologists is simple and deeply unsettling. The confinement caused by the drought didn't just spike this animal's aggression temporarily, it permanently recalibrated his threshold for tolerating anything else sharing his space. Under normal conditions, a rival male backing down ends the confrontation. That's the whole point of ritual display behavior. It lets animals resolve conflicts without dying. But this alpha appears to have lost the ability to recognize surrender at all. The trigger for an attack was no longer resistance from a rival. It was simply presence. The river belonged to him. Anything in the river was an offense against that ownership, and offenses no longer came in degrees. Every offense got the maximum response, every time. The water in his stretch of the Mara effectively became forbidden ground. Other males began avoiding his territory with a consistency the guides had genuinely never seen before. Not gradual avoidance, but total, immediate rerouting the moment they sensed his presence. Females and calves stayed locked into tight defensive groups on the opposite bank. Crocodiles, animals that normally share space with hippos under an uneasy, practical truce, were repeatedly observed actively steering clear of his stretch of river entirely. One animal, one bend of river, a reign of terror that needed no walls, no fences, nothing but reputation to enforce itself. And every living thing in that ecosystem could feel it. Here's the part that's hardest to sit with. The alpha of the Mara isn't wrong. In any sense, biology is equipped to judge. He's responding to real, brutal environmental pressure, with tools evolution spent millions of years building into him. He's the perfect product of a perfect environment for building a monster. The problem is, he didn't build that environment. Forces far bigger than any single stretch of river did, and as long as those forces keep tightening, the Mara is going to keep producing situations we simply don't have the vocabulary for. When the rains finally returned and the river rose again, the rage cooled. The alpha calmed down, the pools reconnected, the pressure eased. But the drought cycle always comes back. It's already back on the calendar, months out on the horizon. And the alpha is still out there, submerged, invisible, waiting for the water to drop again and the spark to relight. If you enjoyed this one, hit that like, subscribe to the channel, it's free, and it genuinely helps us keep bringing you stories like this one. Thanks for watching, see you in the next one.